Welcome to the Art of Healing podcast, the podcast that is dedicated to helping you connect with your mind, body, and spirit. This is Charlize, physician and Reiki master, and thank you so much for joining me. I would like to remind you that although I'm a physician, the information you receive in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. You can find my full disclaimer at my website, www.healingartshealthandwellness.com. If you like what you hear on this podcast, sign up for my weekly newsletter. Check your show notes for more information and for the link to sign up. Thank you. Hello, Art of Healing podcast listeners. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. I wanted to discuss, I picked 6 diagnoses that are common in internal medicine, common in primary care, affect many of us. And the question I wanted to pose for each one of these is, why do we settle for this diagnosis? And what questions should we be asking? So the reason why I wanted to pick sort of these top 6 diagnoses that we settle is that they're common. Most of the time we diagnose it, we go straight to the treatment. We need to treat, of course, but then on the doctor's side, on the patient side, on society side, we stop and we don't try to go any deeper. And it's a loss, because if we don't go any deeper, we're missing an opportunity to heal this diagnosis. So let's talk about these 6 that I picked out. These are not the only ones, just the ones that came to the top of my head, and talk about why we settle and what questions we should be asking about this. Hypertension, sometimes called essential hypertension, primary hypertension. You may see on your doctor's notes some description of that, which we call high blood pressure, is worldwide common, affecting a substantial number of people. Big part of the population have blood pressures that are higher than they should be. So the numbers that we know keep our heart and our brain and our kidneys safe is 120/70. So that's a systolic of 120. A diastolic of 70. So that's roughly the number that we know keeps the body healthy. So, it's diagnosed at a doctor's office most of the time, or if you happen to check your blood pressure somewhere else, and those numbers are higher. Now, as far as what number is needed to treat, depends on medical history, family history, other risk factors. For some individuals, they may not have to go straight to medications. They might be able to manage it without, if it's a stage 1. And then for some individuals, several medications may be needed to prevent damage to the organs. That might be stage 3. That's blood pressures where the systolic is maybe over like 190 or 200. So once a diagnosis of high blood pressure is made, and for the majority of patients, they'll initiate some kind of treatment, probably medication, and then we stop. And why? So why do we settle for just being told you have high blood pressure and you need pills, and we just stop right there? So the questions that I ask my patients once we have treatment, we've addressed, and we're preventing organ damage, is your blood pressure is high. How are you sleeping? Are you sleeping? What's your diet like? Do you have awareness of, maybe what you had? Have you ever noticed if what you eat has affected your blood pressure? I had a patient come in recently. She had a morning appointment and her blood pressure was elevated. It was 150/70, somewhere in that range. She's relatively young. She's in her 30s. And she had never had a high blood pressure, high reading before in my office. So I asked her, what was going on. And she said, "Oh, my blood pressure is high because of what I ate." I said, "What was it that you ate?" And she shared me that was a breakfast from a fast food restaurant. She said, "I know when I eat those things that my pulse goes up. So I figure my blood pressure goes up, but it goes away." So it's a good question to ask. Are you noticing certain foods that you eat seem to sort of rile up your system and make you feel like breathless or make your heart race? And then I also like to ask my patients who are being treated for high blood pressure, do you sense that you have a lot of stress in your life? Or do you sense that it's there and you aren't able to manage it or control it? And even once we've diagnosed high blood pressure, it's a big question. Is this the primary, the type that we say primary hypertension, meaning when I tell my patients, it's our way of saying we don't know why your blood pressure is high, it's just high, we're going to treat it. So is it that, which quite frankly, I don't think that's a good way to describe it because that blood pressure really is a problem with the autonomic nervous system. It's a problem of the central nervous system. It's a problem of the kidneys, of the glands in the body. It's just that at the time we diagnose it, we don't have any one target to pinpoint. It's the whole thing together has come together to drive up the blood pressure. But is there something giving you, is there something raising your blood pressure, such as your sleep is disrupted because your breathing is really bad at night? Is it something in your body that when you lay down to go to sleep, your breathing is restricted from something, the way the chest moves or the way that your neck is made? So should you have a sleep study? Or does it turn out that although you might have felt that you were thriving, you are very successful in maybe multiple places in your life, um, are you maybe really stressed and just hadn't acknowledged it? And is it showing up here silently rather than somewhere else? So when we're dealing with high blood pressure, my response is let's treat it, but let's not just settle. Can we find out a little bit more? Do we have to leave you with high blood pressure or can we fix it? Diabetes, the various types, also affects a substantial number of all the humans on the planet and unfortunately is increasing in frequency in all age groups, all types of diabetes, whether it be the autoimmune type of type 1 diabetes or the metabolic derangement type of type 2 diabetes. If you're wanting to learn more about diabetes, I have a fantastic episode with an endocrinologist and a diabetic specialist that goes back just a few months ago, Dr. Kilpatrick. She gave a really great description of diabetes. We learned from her that it's occurring more than ever. So, when someone is initially diagnosed with diabetes, it's actually traumatizing. There's a part of that initial diagnosis that really just for some reason no one discusses it, but for a lot of people, it's an extremely emotional time and it's heartbreaking because they have not really felt that their lifestyle was hurting them. And then suddenly this crushing blow comes that they have these high sugars, that these high sugars can hurt their heart, hurt their eyes, hurt all of those things. And then even more difficult that they now have to have a practice of intentionally hurting themselves by sticking their fingers in extracting blood to check blood sugars. And then the hardest of these is that, at least at that point in their lives, almost everything that they're doing is making them diabetic. So it's just overwhelming. You don't know where to start. So when someone's diagnosed with diabetes, in the same as with high blood pressure, there's in the medical side, there's numbers. So there's going to be blood sugar. There's going to be sugars in the urine. We're going to look at the cholesterol panel. We'll look at the kidney function, a number of things that we look at with numbers that we want to make sure they're safe to protect the body, protect the mind. But then at that point, and once we get the blood sugars better, if it's with oral medications or with injectable medications or with insulin, then what happens? So recently had had a patient, a gentleman who had been seeing another doctor, and he was really frustrated. He felt that his diabetes just wasn't being managed aggressively enough. And he could not understand why he was only on two medications and his blood sugars were still so high. And he was really feeling that more needed to happen. And my question to him was, well, I had a couple questions. Had you worked with anyone to learn about what your body's nutritional needs are, to learn about what your body is telling you by having converted from a normal metabolism to a diabetic metabolism? And he said no, he had never had that. So it's like working with a diabetic educator. And then I asked him, um, well, it sounds like you've been diabetic for a few years. Why are you still diabetic? And that completely shocked him. Like, whoa. And I said, so you don't want to reverse it? Do you just want to stay diabetic? Because you don't actually have to stay diabetic. And he was completely shocked. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I can fill in the blanks. I know that whatever's going on in your life, it's your blood sugars are high. It's a disease process, but also you're fueling it. And well, like with most diabetics, as we got to dig a little bit deeper, yes, he was fueling it by many of his choices. He had to rely on fast processed food. He didn't think they were a problem. He would check his sugars at home. He knew they were in the 200s, 250s, sometimes 300s, but he just didn't want to really make the connection that he actually could do something about it rather than leaning more on medications. So when we're dealing with diabetes, the questions I ask, and I ask people, why are you still diabetic? Do you want to stay diabetic or do we want to address this? And the easiest and the fastest place to go to is what you're eating, keeping you diabetic. And that's the scariest because for a lot of diabetics, their perception is going to be that we're going to take away everything that's in their lives and they won't be able to be around their family and they won't be able to socialize. And usually what I advise my patients, rather than focusing on takeaway, we might actually want to focus on what's missing. Because one thing we can kind of make a guess at is that probably you don't have enough fiber. Probably there's not enough color in your diet. So there's probably not enough plant-based foods. There may not be enough water. There may not be enough water in your food. So it doesn't have to be strictly snatching and taking away. We just need to see what's missing. We might also want to make sure that you sleep. There's a strong connection between disrupted sleep and long-term sleep deprivation in having high sugars. And even before starting my functional medicine training, I would ask my patients, my diabetic patients, about sleep. And there was a common theme of staying up late, getting up early. Um, how would that lead to diabetes? Because your adrenal glands are going to be pushed to their limit. And as they're being pushed, they're producing more stress hormones. The stress hormones have multiple consequences, but one of their main consequences is to raise the blood sugars, to bring them up, to prepare your body for some kind of stress. Speaking of stress, many diabetics learn to cope with their stress using food. Food becomes an integral part of their life to manage stress, and it may take the form of just a snack of something to runs of binge eating. I have patients who share with me that they often binge on things they know they shouldn't have. And in particular, when we dig a little bit deeper, we find out that there's deep emotional pain that's never been addressed. And it's showing up in my office with diabetes. So for diabetics, how are you stressed? Is your stress being managed with food? And how was your mood 6 months before you were diabetic? That seems like a weird question, but there's studies that show that before being diagnosed with diabetes, many diabetics were already starting to notice they didn't feel well, but they would have thought it was more of like feeling depressed or stressed or even anxious. And it's actually their body talking to them leading up to when there's finally a metabolic collapse where the pancreas cannot produce the insulin it needs and the sugars start to run high. So, for diabetics, why do we settle? Why do we not probe a little bit deeper? And why not probe a little bit deeper? Still treat your diabetes, but as you're treating it with the medication, why not see what we can do to help you feel better and reverse this disease? It was a process to get there, so we just reverse it to go the other way. Autoimmune diseases are devastating in their scope and their frequency. Autoimmune diseases can affect almost any part of the body, from appearance to skin and hair to nails to functionality with joints and muscles and organ function. So, when I say autoimmune diseases, I'm speaking to the whole range, although if you're surviving one of these diseases, you might be dealing with just one of those. But autoimmune diseases include, but aren't limited to, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, which can be called inflammatory bowel disease, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, psoriatic arthritis, and eczema, asthma. So, by all means, that's not an inclusive list. But just to give you an idea, when I'm saying autoimmune in this context, we're speaking to, that whole spectrum of diseases. So when I'm working with patients that come in to see me, and because I know that I like to ask these questions, I like to have a holistic approach. A lot of my patients with autoimmune diseases are already beat me to the question. They ask me because they're the ones who are having to live with this disease, work with a specialist, take multiple medications, and just don't feel good. So the questions asked with those is, when did you last feel really well? I mean, when you last felt well. And for most people with a diagnosed autoimmune disease, they have to rewind more like a decade or longer. And for some of those individuals, they noticed that even in their childhood, there was just like a mini version of this full blown disease starting to show up. I also like to ask, are there certain foods that seem to make you feel worse? So, individuals suffering from an autoimmune arthritis sometimes make the link that certain foods make their joints more red and swollen. Some individuals who deal with food allergies may notice eruption of rashes after they eat certain foods, but it could get even more detailed than that. Some people know certain foods make them very tired or short of breath, and again, just asking the questions, does it seem like certain foods make your symptoms worse? And then for patients with autoimmune disease, um, how does stress interface with your disease? How is it when you're really stressed? Does it show up with this disease? Is the disease worse right away? Or do you go through stress and then you notice a month later your fibromyalgia has flared? And my question for most people with autoimmune disease, really all of them, is, and again, because these individuals tend to ask me, because when you, with individuals with autoimmune disease, often have to be a very strong self advocate. But I like to ask them, how often are you a priority in your life? Um, for reasons that I'm trying to explore, because I do love energy medicine, practice energy medicine, the common theme I notice with most individuals with autoimmune diseases, they're frequently very concerned about the people in their lives. And it's not unusual that they're often more concerned with the people in their lives. And then they sort of come really low on the list. And so my first question for them is, well, when are you a priority? Because you're here seeing me. You've got issues, so let's talk about them. And often they're worried about a spouse, a sibling, a kid, and so much so that it's pulling them away. And so I like to ask them, when are you the priority? And many of them really struggle with answering, like, when am I the priority? Dealing with mood disorders, whether it's fluctuation in the mood that's rapid or prolonged um, mood disruption that's fitting in with the diagnosis of major depression or anxiety. Um, those are very difficult. It's difficult for patients, for all of us to come to terms that that may be how we're feeling. we've been feeling bad, and it may be becoming something that's much bigger than we can manage in our heads or in our hearts. We have to reach out for help. And then once we are diagnosed, and for many patients, after talking to their doctor, discovering they really do have major depression, or maybe after a few visits, I know with my patients, a few visits that are diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, coming to terms with that, and then posing the question of, do we start medications? And that's an emotional time as well, because it's realizing that, oh, wait, this is something I can't just manage on my own. I need help. And you need help, absolutely. But then once we get to that point, then what else? For individuals that are being treated for depression, once we've got the medications that are hopefully having some improvement in their neurochemistry, and we have hopefully got support with therapy and any other healing modalities we need to add, then the next question is, in your life, is there anything that's taking away your energy? One of the hallmarks of depression can be, not absolutely, is going to be decreased energy, fatigue, sometimes a crushing fatigue. And I start to ask those individuals, are there things that they feel might be draining them? And many times there are. It could be things such as, excessive work, toxic relationship, toxic habits. A lot of people don't realize that certain habits they may have may actually be draining their energy. And, that could be a habit of like, excessive shopping, or binging a TV show that on the surface seem to feel good, but in fact are really taking away from their life force. For those that are dealing with both anxiety and depression, I'll sometimes ask them, have you noticed that certain foods you eat make you feel worse? So that's a reference to the fact that sugar spikes, if you're eating something that's really high in sugar, temporarily it may help to improve your mood right then, but then what happens 1 to 2 hours after that? And for most of us, it really doesn't feel good. Or just eating lots of refined carbohydrates. When we're depressed or anxious, there's a process inside the body where it becomes very easy to crave carbohydrates. And for some individuals, that takes over to the point that they almost feel a need to binge on these carbohydrates. And now ask them, once that happens, how was your mood the next several hours to days? And there's usually a correlation with feeling a dive in the mood after having consumed these types of foods. So when it comes to depression and anxiety, why do we settle at just stopping the just starting the medications? Can we go further? And can we actually reverse those by taking a holistic approach? And finally, problematic disrupted sleep, insomnia, is just either an irritation or awful or really, really awful, where it's could be just a really disrupting force in someone's life. Um, so for individuals that are having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep or just simply aren't sleeping, many of them are just desperate and they just want to sleep. So they want a medication just to put them to sleep. And for many people, that's actually where they settle, is that they have insomnia. The insomnia is treated with a medication. But one clue that it's time to go deeper is if you take a medication just with the intention to help you sleep, and you're only getting 5 to 6 hours of sleep a night. For many of my patients that I first meet that are being treated for insomnia, they'll tell me that, because I'll ask, well, how long have you been taking the sleep medicine? And they'll say for 7 or 8 years. How much are you sleeping? About 5 or 6 hours a night. So if you take something just to put you to sleep, but you still only sleep a few hours, And for the most part, these individuals will still have symptoms of sleep deprivation, brain fog, mood changes, carbohydrate, a sweets craving, um, digestive issues, cardiac issues, all of that. Um, they will still be dealing with all of those, still taking the sleep medicine, and often feel that it's time to step the dose up on the medication. So I said, let's ask a few extra questions. Like, for one, if you're not sleeping well at night, what's happening during the daytime? What does your day look like? Is your day full where every second of the day is taken up? Is there time in your day where you can take a break? Or is there time in your day where you have something you might truly enjoy or look forward to? Um, is your day really long where it starts early in the day and doesn't end till way late in the night? Um, what I've commonly noticed with individuals with children in school, that they have these days that start well before 7, and then between work for the parents, school for the kids, extracurricular activities, their days are ending at 8 or 9 p.m. at night. And what they're desiring is to shut everything down, get in the bed, and boom, just fall asleep. But if you've been sort of at a high level all day, you're not going to just fall asleep. Your poor brain is still racing at that intense pace, and your brain is still processing emotions and events, and all of that is still flowing through your brain. And if there hasn't been any space to slow it down and take a breath, it's not likely you'll sleep. You might be really tired, and that's a real frustrating feeling that I hear is, I am so tired, but I'm wired. I can't sleep. If your sleep is disrupted, in addition to what does your day look like, how much of it may have been spent online? Um, we're all online. We're online together right now as you're listening to this podcast. But as you're taking in content, is a lot of it the fast, rapid paced social media content? And in particular, is it in the evening? Because that probably would disrupt your sleep. It's a lot of stimulation. Some of it might be emotionally triggering in a good way or not so good way. But that kind of information in your brain in a very busy world, it's definitely impacting you. And how do you really feel? So, for a lot of people that initiate treatment just for insomnia and don't get to go further, how are you really feeling? Are you anxious sometimes? Is your mood really good most days? And for a lot of patients, their initial answer to me is, my mood's great. I'm not anxious. I'm not depressed. I just can't sleep. But the more and more we talk about it, it's not so simple. That in fact, they have things that are repressed, things that they've wanted to talk about or didn't, something that happened that just kind of got pushed to the corner of their mind. There's something there, but it may be just that they've learned to compensate, and it may even be by staying busy, they don't have to deal with the thing, but now the sleep may be asking them to deal with whatever that is. So much in healthcare, as a practicing physician, I can definitely speak to this, that the environment and the pace and everything that we have to do to take care of our patients encourages us as doctors to focus only on getting the treatment done and getting every patient on their way. And then on the patient side, the expectation is the same, just to get a pill and be on my way. But boy, we are settling on both sides. We are just settling to not feel well. We're settling for taking pills. We're just really not stretching ourselves. So my challenge, or my answer to this question, I guess, is, why are we settling? We're settling for not getting to the root cause of these diseases because on the surface it's easier and it is the fastest solution in that moment. But with the disruption in healthcare and the fact that for many folks, like, hoping to stay with the same doctor, but systems change, doctors change, patients change, we move. Long term, you're not really getting to the answer. You're definitely getting the answer right in the moment, but long term, you're not getting to the answer. And I like to ask my patients, where will you be 5 years from now or 10 years from now? So if we start on this path of I've got this diagnosis, I'm treating it this way, but then we don't try to go deeper. What are we saying where you're going to be at in several years? So I would say let's maybe think differently. So in my own life, and because I had been studying, curious about functional medicine, reading noted authors such as Mark Hyman, and Dr. Bland, these are, functional medicine pioneers. I'm saying that, maybe it's time that we really don't settle, that we start asking those questions. I'm not saying that everything has to happen right away and that you have to change everything in your life right now, but simply asking the question, I've been treating my blood pressure for 20 years. Why is my blood pressure high? Just asking that question, maybe trying to answer it, maybe going deeper. So for those that have been considering going deeper, I am opening up my my functional medicine practice to accept patients. And I can put some links in the show notes as far as how to connect with me and discuss if that's something that you would like. I can currently accept patients in California and Oklahoma, and I'm working on more licenses, so I will definitely let you know. And I am working on developing some programs, even for those that maybe I can't work directly with, that we start to ask those questions and just see where it takes us. It doesn't have to be a definite answer. I just think asking the question, why are we settling? Can we do more? And the answer is yes, we can. And I say that together we get started. So thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope it was helpful. Your show notes will point you to ways that we can stay connected, either online or if you're ready to go a little deeper offline. I will join you next week with another episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Art of Healing podcast. Once again, this is Charlize. You can find out more about me at www.healingartshealthandwellness.com. Did you know I have a blog as well as online courses? Check your show notes to sign up for more information about healing arts, health, and wellness. Thank you. Please feel free to share this episode with your friends, family, and loved ones.